Call the special meeting of June 19th, 2018 to order. The invocation will be recited this evening by Councilman Blake.
Heavenly Father, we thank Thee for this day. Help us to use good judgment for the business at hand, and guide us in wisdom with a continuing sense of truth and fairness for the community we represent.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake.
Here.
Mr. Donovan.
Here.
Mrs. Dowling. Here. Mr. Kirchner.
Here.
Mr. Krieger.
Here.
Mr. Landig. Here. Mr. Marn.
Here.
This time I'd like a moment of silence for Patrolman Matt Mazzani. At this time, I'd like to have the city manager and Captain Gunch give us a rundown of all the people we owe appreciation to that participated.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of council. At this time, on behalf of the Mentor Police Department, the Fire Department, City Council, the administration, the entire city family, we owe a huge thank you for the overwhelming support shown by Mentor residents, Lake County residents, the local business community, the Mentor School District, state, local, and federal officials, and so many more all around the state of Ohio and the country as we shared the loss of Patrolman Matt Mazzani. Your show of support in large and small ways was the greatest comfort to the family of Patrolman Mazzani and the men and women of the Mentor Police Department who are doing their best to cope with this loss. We especially thank the law enforcement community from nearly every corner of the state who came to our memorial service yesterday and joined in the memorial procession. While we don't have a true number, we believe that at least 200 departments participated from all around the state. Also, we are forever indebted to all police agencies in Lake County, the Ohio State Patrol, and the City of Cleveland, who helped protect our community so our Mentor officers could pay their last respects to Officer Mazzani. The love, honor, and support shown by this community toward Officer Mazzani and our police department has been and remains on display since that tragic day just more than a week ago. Officer Mazzani was given the hero's tribute he deserved yesterday for all he gave to this community during his watch. His memory will remain embedded in our hearts as the most lasting memorial to his service, and perhaps more importantly, the contributions he made to this city and the people whose lives he impacted will carry his memory for the rest of their days. Thank you.
Thank you. Wait for him to get back to the seat. Council, you have the minutes of the special meeting of June 19th, 2018.
Move to approve.
Second. Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake.
Yes.
Mr. Donovan.
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling. Yes. Mr. Kirchner.
Yes.
Mr. Krieger.
Yes.
Mr. Landig.
Yes.
Mr. Marn.
Yes.
Public hearings. We have only one public hearing this evening because ordinance number 18-0-057 has been withdrawn. Ordinance number 18-058.
An ordinance amending Part 11, Chapter 1155 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Mentor, 2006, as amended, the same related to Industrial Park District, and declaring an emergency.
And I'll now call the public hearing for ordinance number 18-0-058 to order. This public hearing is being held pursuant to notice published and posted according to law. Mr. Flipiak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll ask Mr. Traub to offer some insight on this code change.
Thank you, Mr. Flipiak, Mr. President, members of council. The code amendment is a rather simple one, and council members will recall there was some discussion as to the desirability of amending the zoning code to permit drive-in or drive-through facilities within the conditional use permit. It's also important to take a look at the map itself that depicts where the MIP districts are located, and the site that initially rose this question is the only one that's currently undeveloped, and one of less than half a dozen that could potentially be redeveloped that might be interested in such a code amendment. So its applicability is very limited. This was discussed at the Municipal Planning Commission. They voted 6-0 to recommend the amendment, and the wording is presented before you for your acceptance. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak in favor of this item? Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition of this item? Hearing none, council is in receipt of all correspondence and emails received pertaining to this matter. This public hearing is adjourned. Council administration would like to move forward with the ordinance with amendments to discuss. We'll need to remove the legislation from the table.
Move to remove.
Second. Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes. Mr. Flipiak?
Thank you, Mr. President, members of council, and actually, after some reconsideration of the original changed language that we submitted to you, we have agreed to come back to you with a much more modest change, which simply changes the person in charge of making determinations as to hazards in the public right-of-way, changing that, as the code currently states, from the Parks and Recreation Director to the Public Works Director, who has, for all practical purposes, exercised that authority for many years now. We did originally look at specifying some height tolerances within those rights-of-way, but after further reflection, we felt that because of the differences in the ages of trees and their growth rates, we didn't really want to prescribe something that would be difficult to enforce. So leaving that discretion to the the director is still the preferred option. So that minor change is all.
Council, what's your pleasure?
Move to amend.
Second. Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan? Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Move to suspend as amended.
Second. Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig? Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Move to approve as amended.
Second. Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes. Ordinance number 18-0-026 has been approved as amended.
Congratulations to the administration and council for finally getting that off our agenda.
Breeze right through that.
Okay. Ordinance number 18-0-057. Again, this legislation has been withdrawn. Ordinance number 18-0-058.
An ordinance amending Part 11, Chapter 1155 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Mentor 2006 as amended, the same related to Industrial Park District, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Flipiak.
Nothing further to add to Mr. Traub's comments, council. We would recommend approval.
Move to
Council, what's your
suspend.
pleasure? Second. Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake? Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second. Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes. Ordinance number 18-0-058 has been approved. Ordinance number 18-0-059.
An ordinance to authorize advances of funds and revisions to appropriations and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Flipiak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Malinowski, please.
Thank you, Mr. Filipiak. Members of council, this ordinance firstly incorporates two temporary cash advances, both to cover subsequent ordinances on bid projects. The largest being the Orchard Road reconstruction project, and the other item, the Hopkins reconstruction project, or resurfacing project, I'm sorry. The ordinance also incorporates several increases in appropriations, both to cover the advances that are on this ordinance, and then also a number of items that are outlined in the staff memo. As far as highlighting any items there, the $42,000 of additional custodial services needs to be appropriated. And then there's a $100,000 increase to the street fund for 3 different items. Change order on Garfield Park, $47,000. Additional cost of road salt due to the unit price, $37,000. And then an additional cost on the final price on a vacuum jet sewer cleaner vehicle, $16,000. Other than that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I recommend approval. Thank you.
Council, what's your pleasure?
Move to suspend.
Second.
Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Ordinance number 18-0-059 has been approved. I'm going to take a moment, since we have a lot of young people here, to explain what we're doing, because they may not understand that we get the information on all these items for council prior to the meeting, well in advance of the meeting. And the reason we go through the suspension system is normally if it's an item that you might want to hear up to 3 times, we have to hear it 3 times. If it's something like the funding for some of the trucks and things like that, there's no reason to delay that vote, so we suspend it so we can go ahead and vote on it tonight instead of 3 meetings from now. Okay? I just wanted to make that clear. Ordinance number 18-0-060.
An ordinance determining to proceed with the improvement of streets hereinafter mentioned within the termini designated by supplying such streets with electric street lighting and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Filipiak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and members of council, ordinance 60 and 61 will be addressed by the finance director. Mr. Malinowski.
Thank you, Mr. Filipiak. Members of council, the next 2 ordinances are the next 2 steps in the street lighting assessment process. You passed a resolution declaring it okay to go ahead and set a rate and do street lighting citywide. The first ordinance authorizes the proceeding forward with this process, and the second ordinance, number 61, authorizes the process of levying the assessments to the benefiting property owners. As a reminder, the street lighting rate was identical to last year, $1.20 per $1,000 of assessed valuation. That rate is 5 cents higher than it was back in the year 2000, just as a baseline for you. And I would recommend the approval of both of these next 2 ordinances. Thank you.
Mr. President,
Yes.
Mr. Malinowski or Mr. Filipiak, we've talked for years about trying to get them to update their system to 2018 standards. Has there been any further movement of us requesting that?
Yeah, thank you, Councilman. That's a great question. We have had several talks in recent, probably more so over the last year, because it wasn't that long ago that First Energy, through the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, actually adopted a tariff rate system for LED lighting. So we have requested to become the first community in Northeast Ohio to actually start to do some transitioning of our street lighting over to that. Now, there's a few complications associated with that. The first being we are interested, they don't actually have, they're not prepared for it, as simple as that. It's a city our size, a transition would be a long process. It would take several years. They also have not completely, they have a single vendor. We have requested that they consider one of our local vendors as an option for that lighting, and that local vendor has provided information to the utility to be evaluated to become one of their purchasers. So we're working toward that, and I think over time, obviously there's a capital component associated with that, but I think right now on a basic, the most simplest basic swap out, the estimate is that the heads, if just the heads and the arms were swapped out, it's like a 3-year payback. So significant savings going forward. And I will point out that council has approved the decorative lighting that council has approved in years past, including that which is being installed presently in the old district old village district, is all LED high-efficiency lighting, which will replace existing First Energy poles and lines. So over time, that will pay for itself as well. Thank you.
Didn't we have an idea what the dollar amount was for our cost in order to proceed with this old-fashioned way of assessing?
Matt, I don't know if Matt knows the actual number. I thought there was a significant, as much as 50% potential reduction if you
Okay.
swapped out everything to LED. It was rather significant.
I'm sorry, you asked what the cost to implement the LED changeout?
Correct.
It's about $1.7 million.
Okay. And it's a 50% reduction at residents. Okay.
Well, if you consider that these two ordinances here will authorize about $1.4 million worth of assessment citywide, cut that in half, obviously it won't take long to pay for that change out. Again, we're reliant on the utility to work with us on that, and not every, it's not as easy as just swapping out the lights, because LED lighting doesn't illuminate roadways in the same fashion, so there may be there'll be a lot of interesting little intricacies to this over time, but it's a path we want to start to go down.
Okay, thank you. Council, I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised. Finally have movement after years.
Mr. President, could I make a comment?
Yes.
We will still continue with an assessment program.
Right.
It'll just be a lot cheaper.
Right.
I just wanted to make that clear that, I know it's kind of a cumbersome program that we go through, but it's state law, so.
Exactly.
Lot
but
smaller bill.
But it costs taxpayers of Mentor a significant amount in order to proceed with the way they do it. In 2018, with automation and computers and technology, it should be done a little quicker and cheaper, because it's the taxpayers and the flipping the bill. So,
Absolutely.
So if we could save them money somehow, okay. So,
Move to
wait till-
suspend.
Second.
Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling? Yes. Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling? Yes. Mr. Kirchner? Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Ordinance number 18-0-060 has been approved. Ordinance number 18-0-061.
An ordinance to levy assessments for the improvement of various streets in the city of Mentor by supplying said streets with electric street lighting and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Filipiak.
Nothing further.
Move to suspend.
Thank you. Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling? Yes. Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig? Yes. Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake? Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling? Yes. Mr. Kirchner? Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Ordinance number 18-0-061 has been approved. Ordinance number 18-0-062.
An ordinance amending Part 9, adopting Chapter 933, Small Cell Facilities and Wireless Support Structures of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Mentor, 2006, as amended, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Filipiak.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of council. I'll defer to the law director here just momentarily. I would just say that I think we worked together on this, but really the law director and his staff have done the heavy lifting in putting this together and putting into a coherent new section of our code a way to really get out in front of other communities in reacting to the state legislation that gave a fairly comprehensive blanket allowance of small cell facilities and wireless support structures to be placed in public rights-of-way. I think that the law department has done a very good job of addressing most of the operational needs and structuring a ordinance so that we're able to complement legislation that's already been passed by council with respect to protecting our rights-of-way, and also providing a very comprehensive approach and process for processing the permitting and protecting the city from sort of a Wild West in our rights-of-way. So, Mr. Hennig.
Thank you, Mr. Flipiak. May I?
Yes, go ahead.
You know, that Wild West is the term I was going to use. Laissez-faire might have been another one. But you'll remember 18 months ago, we actually amended Chapter 931 significantly. And the real substantive, meaningful changes were put in 931.17 regarding poles, how tall they could be, whether they had to be ornamental, how far apart they might become. A lot of different things that we were worried about, because if you remember, AT&T was successful in getting an amendment made to the state code that permitted some, cowboy type tactics almost to locating poles in our rights of way. And as soon as that legislation was enacted, Mentor and some of its sister cities in Lake County, and I'm sure many cities across the state, started receiving requests to construct 120-foot tall poles right along the arterial roadways within the city and at the intersection. So if you can imagine starting to dot Route 20 or 306 or 615 with 120-foot tall poles that are right next to the street, it was a little concerning. In addition, that prior legislation enabled those service providers to latch their devices onto city property without having our consent or making any adjustments for it. So it was pretty awful stuff. And we made all these changes to Chapter 131 in response to that. And then lawsuits were filed against that enactment, and it dragged on and dragged out. And the name Sarah LaTourette comes to mind because she and another legislator got together and they started working with the small cell providers to figure out a better way to do this than the communities and the providers shoving each other around. And what has happened is they have come up with a House bill that has been signed into law, 478. It's going to become effective August 1st. And it does a lot of what we did back 18 months ago. And even maybe allows for a little bit more and brings some sense to it. Now, the one thing that it does that's different is usually to stay constitutionally sound, you have to treat a group of providers the same way. You can't single one out for different treatment. Well, as part of this enactment, the providers, the small cell facility providers, and the state legislators agreed to create a whole new chapter for them and treat them differently, because the technology was going to be different, and the demands that it required were different than what everybody else needed. The utility, a lot of utilities are buried underground, and the utility poles that string the cables and the high tension or high voltage wires are already where they're at. Not much of that's going to change. It's what these small cell providers need to do that's going to be different. And I look out in the audience and we have a lot of really young people, and probably every single one of them has a mobile device. And that's what this infrastructure goes to, is making that mobile device even faster, even more complete. And the way to do that is to provide more transmitting capacity in and around the city. You just have to do it in a reasonable fashion. And we thought that poles 120 feet tall all along our intersections and major arterials was not reasonable. So that means I'm about done talking.
Good, amazing, amazing.
Good, I love that.
Council, what's your pleasure?
Well, so that's what this is. It's a new chapter, and I just thought I'd give you the background on it. And it also incorporates what we have from 931 as far as our existing requirements on those substantive issues of pole placement, height, et cetera. Thank you.
President,
Thank you, Mr. Hennig. Mr. Donovan?
and that's how you're going to talk when you get your law degree, you guys.
Mr. President,
No one will like you.
Yes,
I
Mr. Blake.
have a question. I looked at this over the last couple days, and I get the understanding this is to bring 5G network to us, which, as Richard said, will speed up online movies and technology that can come and maybe be able someday to get rid of cable. But the whole question is, what will these pods look like? Are they going to be on top of our phone poles and no higher, or that's what I would love to know what this will look like in our right of way in terms of heights and physical presence. Ken?
Mr. President?
Um,
So, Councilman Blake, I think one of the important parts of this legislation is I don't know what they'll look like either. I don't know that anybody in the room can really tell us. What I do know is they're going to look different this year from 2 years from now when we're going to 6G and et cetera. But our ordinance allows us to prescribe some design guidelines, and that offers discretion into my office, and so some of our staff is already reviewing some sample design guidelines adopted by other communities. So it's always a give and take. I think everybody here understands that we embrace technology and that our personal lives and in the life of our business community depend on this type of connectivity and its improvement. So we embrace that, but there's a balancing act that has to be done to retain the character of the community and council's desires for those standards that you have set. So we will do our best to find that balance and modify where we can so that the investment we've made to retain an attractive and aesthetic, desirably aesthetic community is one that we can seek out. So that's what we're after. And I think we can sit here today and tell you exactly what they're going to look like, but I know smaller is better, less intrusive is better, shorter is better. Things that blend in as well as possible with, especially in areas like our old village and things like that, where we take a lot of pride and investment in keeping those architectural standards up.
Okay.
Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. Hennig.
You know, I might have a word on that, too. It's been clear when I've met with Dave Swigger and other members of our engineering group with these representatives that the biggest thing they're concerned about is a line of sight. And that's why they've got these big, tall poles, because they're still off to the side, and they've got to contend with trees. And, of course, the trees are at the edge of the roadway. I'd like to think that what we might end up seeing is, and it's not too far afield from what we see already. We see the mast arms that extend over halfway across. Well, what would be wrong with something a little bit taller and the mast arms go all the way across, because they all want to poke their beams right down the middle of the street. Mm-hmm. And they can get farther that way. They don't have to have as many poles or as high if they can get their transmission down the street. So why not let them use the middle of the street? If you put it up high enough, you won't have to have them too close. And that way they get out of the utility ways. I mean, the poles that are there already on the sides and the trees, it's a big mess. So I'm thinking middle of the street and arches or something like that is what I'm betting you're probably going to see.
Thank you. Thanks.
Council, what's your pleasure?
Move to suspend.
Second?
Julie, read the roll?
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second?
Julie, read the roll?
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Ordinance number 18-0-062 has been approved. Ordinance number 18-0-063.
An ordinance declaring improvements to certain parcels of real property to the public purpose, describing the public improvements to be made to directly benefit such parcels, requiring the owner of the improvements on such parcels to make service payments in lieu of taxes, establishing a municipal public improvement tax increment equivalent fund for the deposit of such service payments, and related authorizations pursuant to Ohio Revised Code Sections 5709.40, 5709.42, and 5709.3, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Flippia.
Thank you, Mr. President, and these parcels, of course, refer to the City Market Project. Mr. Traub, please.
Thank you, Mr. Filipiak, and members of council. I would direct your attention to the aerial photograph that's included in your packet. It depicts the site at the northeast corner of the Wisconsin, what is called the Market District, as well as the Wisconsin project. But in any case, there's an existing building there that several of the tenants have already vacated. There's one remaining tenant in there. And really, for purposes of understanding why this legislation is being brought forward now, that building is going to be demolished shortly, and the desire is to have the value of that property set at zero, so that the city can enjoy the maximum benefit of those income tax revenues once the site is redeveloped. So again, the demolition permit, I believe, has been issued for that project. It'll be removed shortly, and we want to be there with our TIF legislation in hand to set the value of that property as close to zero as we can. And then when a new project comes in for redevelopment, which will be shortly, we're able to capture the full tax value of that. Thank you.
Council.
Move to suspend.
Second.
Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake? Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Before I second, council, just let you guys all in on something. We had our meeting and with Mr. Krieger and Mr. San Pedro, Mr. Flipiak. And if council remembers, years ago, we used to do the tax abatements, and we did away with those because it didn't work out so well. In fact, about 66% failed. So then we went with the Mentor Incentive Grant. And the Mentor Incentive Grant has been a process that we've kind of curved and molded to make it work where we need to make it work based on Mr. Traub's ideas and his staff and the administration. The tax incremental financing came about, Kirch, about 10 years ago underneath City Manager John Conrad. Yeah. And we really haven't done anything in terms of molding it or trying to curtail it to keep up with the times. So I threw a few ideas out to Mr. Krieger, Mr. Flipiak, and Mr. San Pedro just today. And we're going to have a work session when we come back after summer break to discuss these different ideas of how we could better utilize this to have a, Mr. Traub saying, another tool in the toolbox for us to use for economic development. So with that, I second.
Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Ordinance number 18-0-063 has been approved. Ordinance number 18-0-064.
An ordinance authorizing the city manager to enter into a contract with Jack Johanny Companies, Inc. for the purchase of a used combination vacuum/jet sewer cleaning vehicle and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Flipiak.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of council. Mr. Schweikert, please.
Thank you. Annually, the Public Works Department budgets monies in the street fund for the purchase of vehicles and equipment. Presently, the older of our two combination sewer jet vacuum trucks is the 1996 model year and is no longer operational or capable of being repaired. While it is important to maintain two of these vehicles, we feel that a used jet vac can meet our needs for many years to come at a significant cost savings. Having two of these vehicles will allow us to continue our program of constantly inspecting and cleaning our storm sewer system. To this end, bids were open on June 1st for the purchase of a used vacuum jet sewer cleaning vehicle. Two bids were received for this vehicle, with the low bid being submitted by Jack Johanny Companies at a price of $187,500. Thank you.
Council.
Move to suspend.
Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirschner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirschner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Ordinance number 18-0-064 has been approved. Ordinance number 18-0-065.
An ordinance authorizing the city manager to award a bid contract to JTO Inc. for the Orchard Road Improvements Project and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Filipiak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I think you'll be the happiest one to know that another almost $3 million will be invested into the Headlands Roads as part of our larger Headlands Roads project, and Mr. Swigger will offer us some details.
Thank you, Mr. Filipiak. The Orchard Road Improvement Project consists of complete roadway reconstruction using asphalt concrete pavement and concrete curbs. It also includes drive apron replacement, sanitary and storm lateral replacement, including catch basins and manholes. The project limits will extend from Woodridge Road to Lake Overlook Drive, which is about 3/4 of a mile in length. Certain project costs will be shared by the Lake County Department of Utilities in order to move forward and avoid duplication of effort and additional inconvenience to the residents. Lake County Department of Utilities will cover all costs associated with sanitary sewer lateral replacement. A grant of $500,000 and a loan of $150,000 were secured through the Ohio Public Works Commission for the project with a 22% limit on construction costs. 3 bids were opened on Friday, June 22nd for the project. The bids ranged from a low bid of $2,248,361.20 to a high bid of $2,532,863.70. It's been determined that JTO Incorporated of Mentor, Ohio submitted the lowest total bid of $2,248,361.20. The engineer's opinion of probable construction cost was $2.5 million. And a review of the bid from JTO indicates that it's in conformance with all contract requirements, and it's therefore recommended that the contract be awarded to JTO Incorporated, who are experienced and qualified to perform this work in the amount of $2,248,361.20. The scheduled completion date for the project is September 27th of 2019. Thank you.
Council, what's your pleasure?
Mr. President, question for
Yes.
administration. Mr. Flipiak, you remember your staff. Are we still looking at doing basically a street a year?
Well, you know, we've been very fortunate because the engineering department has done a great job of securing OPWC loans for the first 2 phases. Marigold, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Swigger, but will be probably finished up by the end of this year, early 2019.
Correct.
So we can't quite do it on the pace of 1 per year, although that's approximately what we had hoped for. I think we have found that because of the condition of those roads and our internal preparation, most of these specs, in our cooperation with Lake County Utilities, there are a lot of factors here that might limit that. So our ability to get additional grant dollars, the county's ability to move forward at the same pace with us because they're contributing several $100,000 per project here as well. But we're hopeful to do that. So we'll see. That probably won't keep up that pace is my guess, but we'll get close to it.
Is there a way to bundle the streets together?
It's difficult because, you know, when we're tearing these roads up, it creates a lot of problems out there, and it's not the easiest project to manage because it's a total tear out and total rehab. So
What about in terms of funding and help from
well,
outside
again,
sources?
about the only source of funding we have here is OPWC, and if we were to bundle that, it would actually lessen our ability to get funding because we're pretty much maxing out what we could reasonably hope to get on any single project. So doing this in phases both meets some of the more practical needs out there and then also gets us the best opportunity for outside resources.
Yeah, I just was hoping buying in bulk would save us a few bucks, but apparently not. Okay, thank you.
Your second.
A second.
Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirschner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirschner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Ordinance number 18-0-065 has been approved. Ordinance number 18-0-066.
An ordinance authorizing the city manager to award a bid contract to Roniak Paving, Inc. for the Hopkins Road resurfacing project and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Filipiak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and this is another successful OPWC project. Mr. Swigger, please.
Thank you, Mr. Filipiak. 5 bids were opened on Friday, June 22nd for the Hopkins Road resurfacing project. The project will repave Hopkins Road from Menor Avenue to State Route 84. The 5 bids range from a low bid of $356,695 to a high bid of $402,563.90. It's been determined that Roniak Paving Incorporated of Burton, Ohio submitted the lowest bid of $356,695. The engineer's opinion of probable construction cost was $408,000. Project's been awarded a $150,000 grant and a $50,000 loan through the Ohio Public Works Commission to cover up to 44% of the project cost. Review of the bid from Roniak Paving indicates it's in conformance with all contract requirements. It's therefore recommended that we award the contract to Roniak Paving Incorporated. The scheduled final completion date for the project is October 31st of 2018. Thank you.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Blake.
and I'm so happy that this can get done this year.
I know you are.
I'm really happy. So I want to say thank you for, you guys putting this together and getting the funding for it. And I'm glad it can get done before the season ends. So very pleased. This is a well-traveled road in Ward 1. I think we get 7,000 car trips up and down a day. So having that done is going to be terrific. Thank you.
And I know that the school district is happy because that's the primary travel route to and from Hopkins and
It is.
and Garfield, and so.
There's a lot of traffic up and down there. So that's terrific. Thank you.
Suspend.
Council, what's your pleasure?
I'll move to suspend.
Second. Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan? Yes. Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Move for passage.
Second.
Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner? Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig? Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Ordinance number 18-0-066 has been approved. Ordinance number 18-0-067.
An ordinance authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with the Lake County, Ohio Port and Economic Development Authority and the Menor Harbor Yachting Club for feasibility study cost sharing and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Filipiak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, this is another project that our office has been working very closely with the law director on. We have been meeting in earnest with the Yacht Club, the Port Authority, and the Army Corps of Engineers to work through some of the details on this project. Council is very aware of the feasibility study agreement and the limitations in our participation. So both these two ordinances, 67 and 68, formally allow us to enter into agreement with each of the two parties here to be able to move forward with that feasibility study related to the improvements on the Mentor Harbor Channel.
Suspend.
Second.
Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig? Mr. Marne?
Yes. Move to approve.
Second.
Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan? Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Ordinance number 18-0-067 has been approved. Ordinance number 18-0-068.
An ordinance authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with the Department of the Army, Lake County, Ohio Port and Economic Development Authority, and the Menor Harbor Yachting Club for a feasibility study and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Filipiak.
Nothing further.
Move to suspend.
Second.
Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake? Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Ordinance number 18-0-068 has been approved. Resolution number 18-R-114.
A resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with Buckeye Trail Association establishing the city of Mentor as a Buckeye Trail town.
Mr. Filipiak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And essentially, this memorandum of understanding places us in a position to be one component on a larger visitation to the state of Ohio project to help all types of tourism within the state of Ohio so that Mentor is on the map as a Buckeye Trail stop. And I'll ask Mr. Gorsick if he wishes to add anything to that. Ante? Sure, absolutely.
He goes, do you want me to?
Essentially, the long story short is, being a Buckeye Trail town, we're going to be promoted by the Buckeye Trail Association to all the hikers to take part in this every year. There's a larger loop and there's a smaller loop, and the people that walk the smaller loop would actually go through the city. The Buckeye Trail, as many people know, terminates at Headlands Beach State Park, and it goes all the way through town, up and down Hopkins. One of the tenets of this thing is getting our local businesses involved, getting our restaurants, getting our hotels, and other service providers to offer discounts and that sort of a thing to hikers who would come into town. So basically, it is a little bit of an economic boost.
Thank you. Counsel?
Move to suspend?
Second.
Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Move to approve?
Second.
Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake? Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling? Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Resolution number 18-R-114 has been adopted. Resolution 18-R-115.
A resolution declaring the necessity of repairing and reconstructing certain sidewalks in Zone B associated with the 2018 pedestrian safety program in the city of Mentor, requiring that abutting property owners repair same, ratifying and confirming notices, authorizing repair or reconstruction of said sidewalks by the city engineer, and in certain cases, providing for assessment of cost, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Filipiak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Swigert, please.
Thank you, Mr. Filipiak. In May of this year, the city began inspecting sidewalks in Zone 4B of Ward 4. Inspections are complete and locations of properties with deficient sidewalk have been identified. A total of 398 out of 549 parcels were found to have deficient sidewalks during the course of the inspections. 1,165 sidewalk slabs were found to have deficiencies requiring repair or replacement. Of this total, the city will be replacing 426 slabs adjacent to street trees and storm sewer manholes. Additionally, the city will be reconstructing 60 handicap ramps at intersections. Homeowners will be responsible for the remaining 739 slabs to be repaired or replaced. This legislation is a resolution of necessity which declares that it is necessary to repair the sidewalk deficiencies identified in Exhibit A in accordance with Section 729 of the Ohio Revised Code and Chapter 913 of the Mentor Municipal Code. Upon council approval of this resolution, property owners will be notified and provided 45 days with which to make the repairs. Repairs not made within the 45-day time frame will then be made by the city's sidewalk contractor next spring, with costs associated back to the property owner, costs assessed back to the property owner. And the engineering department will keep you updated as the program proceeds. Thank you.
Mr. Landy.
Thank you, Council President. Just something I learned recently with a resident, that if the resident has a leveling issue or a crack issue, they can repair those with alternate means. If they don't, in the given 45-day time, and it goes to the city contract, it will be all done as replacement, just to clarify that program, the way it works.
That is correct.
Counsel, what's your pleasure?
Move to suspend?
President?
Yes, Ms. Dowling.
Just a question for the administration. Other than the fact that if a resident prefers to have it put on their taxes as opposed to paying for it, do we have any ability, or is there any program to assist residents financially with this?
Well, one of the things that the city does to ease that burden is that, at council's direction, at the time that this program was commenced, We did agree to hold that assessment process out over no less than a 3-year period. So that does help to lower the cost, but of course, the homeowner still does pay. Another way that we help to lower the cost on that is that because of the city's interest in maintaining a strong urban forest, we have typically paid for those slabs that are directly impacted by live and thriving street trees. So that generally lowers the cost, can lower the cost by a great deal. In so many cases, there's no cost associated with that if those are the only impacted slabs. And then, of course, the city pays for all intersection-related slabs, so those handicap ramps immediately adjacent at corners. So that all helps. We don't have any direct offsets, although I'm fairly convinced that for those who fall into the low to moderate income levels, they of course would be eligible for assistance through the city's home program, home rehabilitation program that utilizes community development block grants annually. And Mr. Traub might be able to tell me, I have to believe that some have taken advantage of that in the past.
I can't tell you that, Mr. City Manager, but certainly something we can look at. And given the fact, as you stated, the important criteria is to the fact that they are in fact low and moderate income, could vary. They could individually be qualified for such a project.
So some types of improvement that have qualified in the past, and I know that these were important to certain members of council, were things like stormwater improvements or to help on-site, and of course any variety of other home improvements.
Is that information that possibly when we're working with the resident that we may be providing to someone? I mean, I don't know that necessarily all residents would know that that would be available, and it might be a stressful situation. I don't know, do we offer that information, or?
I don't think we do much to really tell them at the time that this program is actually being implemented neighborhood to neighborhood. Certainly that information is available on our website and would be available to talk to one of our in-house employees who deal with that program. But we don't really put that out there. There may be other programs that are available that are unrelated to government funding, but again, we are not closely associated with those.
Okay, thank you.
I made the motion to suspend. Second.
Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Resolution number 18-R-115 has been approved. Second reading, we have none. Third reading, we have none. We're going to go to manager report. Before, Mr. Filipiak, you started, I'd like to point out that this is Mr. Traub, our economic director's last meeting, and going into retirement. I'm hoping you look forward to that. I know you're moving up by your grandchildren to be closer. That's great. You know, it's also appropriate maybe to mention you came new hire under a president of council named Krieger, Donald Krieger. You're leaving council under Donald Krieger. I don't know if that says something more, but enjoy your retirement. Mr. Filipiak.
President?
Yes.
You were just talking, a couple of things. Ron, I'd like to specifically thank you. I was 29 years old when I was first elected, and you were the very first person in administration to pull me aside and take me under your wing. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. Number two, what I was thinking about was people sometimes ask me, what's the worst thing that ever happened to you on council? And I always comment Avery Dennison in Norton Parkway. People say, what's the best thing that ever happened to you on council? I say Avery Dennison on Norton Parkway. And I said, if it wasn't for Ron Traub, we would have never got through it. And last but not least, I'm going to get my hands on that file of yours that I've only touched a couple of times in my life. You are not leaving this building alive without it. So all the council could see it too. But thank you very much for all your years of service and what you've done in terms of economic development and working with people in the city. I get reports. I heard just yesterday at Noosa. Was that true? For lunch?
I was in Noosa yesterday.
See? I was told that today. I always hear you're everywhere. But thank you for your time and service.
Mr. President.
Yes, Mr.
Ron,
Franklin.
thank you so much for caring. That's all I want to say. I really appreciate the way you took me under your wing also, and I want to thank you for everything you've done for me. Thank you so much for caring about the city the way you did. Appreciate it.
Mr. Filipiak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And it's no coincidence that that is the first item on my report
I
tonight.
figured we'd beat you to it.
So let's talk a little. This is a special night because not only Ron will be the first to tell you that this isn't his last day, and I know you all know that he plans on working very hard and aggressively right up until that last day, and he's even indicated that he's willing to do some work after he's left our employment, whatever it takes. And I think that pretty much says it all about Ron, is whatever it takes. I mean, he has been. For nearly 30 years, Ron has been a friend to this city. He's been a part of nearly all the development in this city in some fashion or another in 30 years. And if there's, if for all of those who quite rightly know that this is a successful economy and that this community has been, the success of this community is built in a very large part on the success of our business community and the jobs it provides and the families that have thrived here as a result of that economic development, they all owe him some level of gratitude for that. And when we talk about legacies, that's a pretty big one, because jobs build lives, and he's done a great deal of that. Ron has been a part and pioneered a number of development tools and marketing programs and schemes and things that some that worked, some that didn't work as well, all that are memorable, but many of the things that Mentor does has been emulated across the state and in other parts, frankly, not quite as successfully because they don't have someone steady at the helm as Mr. Traub has been. He's been a friend to all of us, and I will tell you that having the benefit of working with Ron for nearly 9 years, there has never been a single thing that I have asked of him that he hasn't been willing to do and gone over and above doing. He is 100%, 110% mentor. And so all I have to say in closing is that, Ron, for the last 30 years, you have made it a great day in the city of Mentor.
You don't have a picture, do you, Ron?
He always has a few words, though. Who can ever get out of their mind the monster from the Menor Lagoon?
I see we have new technology here, so hopefully my voice will carry forward. I want to thank you for the opportunity to address City Council and our community, and also to thank Ken Filipiak and managers who preceded you, going back to Ed Potagill, who hired me some 29 plus years ago for the opportunity to bring my talents to the city, where together we've created a 21st century city. Rather than looking backward, though, as such occasion might inspire, I'd like to look into the future and offer some insights. There are several ways that one might gauge the economic health of our community as I leave you. Income tax receipts, single-family building permits, and the unemployment rate. All of those indicators have been positive so far this year, although the single-family home starts are a little bit behind where we were last year. The unemployment rate in May was 4% versus 4.5% a year ago, but for practical purposes, we're at full employment, which is why, and this is why I'm on the pedestal now, we must continue to offer our high school seniors dual viable career paths. We need to find better ways to move potential employees from where the job opportunities are here in Mentor, from perhaps where they live. And we also need to offer better job training opportunities. Does the city need to be the leader of those endeavors? No, but we need to be sitting at the table to bring those forward. While second quarter home sales are not yet available, the number of homes sold, comparing the first quarter of 2017 with the first quarter of 2018, were up 27% in the city. The average price, thank goodness, increased 6%, and the number of days that a home remained on the market declined by 8%. Again, all positive indicators. The opportunities for new single-family construction, though, as members of council and the administration are very well aware, are very limited. However, if Mentor's population is to continue to grow, and more importantly, to diversify in terms of the age of individuals present in our community, we must significantly increase the permitted density for apartments and continue to work towards implementing changes to the planned unit development ordinance that I know you're currently working on. The quality of apartments that we want to see in the community are going to be more costly to construct, and the local market, frankly, can only bear so much in terms of rent. And therefore, what we must look to in the overall development equation is to increase the density so we can make this work for the benefit of our community. The second quarter retail vacancy rate, hot off the press, is 4.1%, lower than both the county and the region. Again, but we have our challenges, primarily the vacant Sears store, but other former big boxes as well. The market is not going to take care of itself. I don't like to use cliches, but out-of-the-box ideas for repurposing the Sears site and continuous interaction with retailers and brokers, both large and small, both here in Mentor and Columbus and Las Vegas, must be a continued part of the continued effort in economic development. And perhaps we will even move up in our retail rankings that'll be coming out next year from the U.S. Census of Retail Trade, from our current 6th position to number 5, perhaps passing the city of Akron. And then finally, the industrial sector is also performing well. Our industrial vacancy, again, hot off the press, same data source, for the second quarter in Mentor is 2.2%. Again, this is both good news, but it also contains an element of concern because our supply of greenfield industrial sites is also very limited. We had 2 prospects, as council may remember, over the course of the last year or so for the Liberty Business Park behind the Caterpillar plant, but neither worked out. We must find ways to work with the property owners and turn those fallow industrial properties into improved sites that can be utilized by our communities. Finally, I wanted to note that I won't be leaving the city entirely. This one won't talk back to you or offer much insight, but I will leave my presence here. Thank you very much.
Mr. Flipiak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be very brief here. Just a couple of important announcements. As a reminder to the public, waste collection will be delayed by 1 day for the Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday collection routes this week to the observance of Independence Day on the 4th. The Cleveland Pops Orchestra will be performing at the Mentor Civic Amphitheater tomorrow, July 4th, as part of the City of Mentor's Independence Day celebration. Under the direction of conductor Jason Sieber, the concert will begin at 8 p.m., followed by a spectacular 25-minute fireworks display, as we always do. There are food trucks and beverages available this year. Grounds open at 4 p.m., and the orchestra will be playing along with the fireworks this year live, so that'll be great. And then the following Saturday, this coming Saturday, the Menor Amped Country Music Festival is slated for its first year. July 7th from 1 to 9 p.m. We'll feature 3 country bands, Country Redford, Tony Rio, and Post Road. There will be a couple of very strong acoustic acts in between those larger groups. And the gates open at noon for that. Music starts at 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Filipiak. Clerk's correspondence. Julie.
Council is in receipt of the Menor Municipal Court month-end report for May of 2018, and council is also in receipt of 2 liquor permits, both for Mbe Mae Inc., DBA Burger Ian. That's it.
Thank you. Commission committee reports, we have none. Old business? None. New business?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr.
I
Kirchner.
would like to put 3 names up for nomination for the Assessment Equalization Board, and those 3 names are Leonard Gilbert, Steve Emmerman, and John Ayton.
Thank you.
And I pose that as a motion.
Are there any other? Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes. Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Marne.
I move to recommend for Lake County, Ohio Port and Economic Development Authority Board the appointment of retired Councilman James Struna.
Second.
Any others? Julie, call the roll.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig? Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Congratulations to all of our appointments.
Okay. Now we come to persons before council. Going to ask us, in the past, when we have this number of people sitting in the council chambers, and obviously there's a number of you that have submitted that they'd like to talk for the 4 minutes allowed, but what we'd like to see happen is, rather than have 20 individuals state the same thing, do you have a representative that wants to give council what their desires are? Please state your name and address.
My name is Julie Gable. Address is 7700 Mary Lane. Menor residents, members of City Council, I'm in attendance today to present pertinent information and insight into the travesty that has been inflicted on the Menor High School hockey family. My name is Julie Gable, as stated, and I have been a Menor resident for over 35 years. I'm a proud Menor High School alumni and have been active with the rink since the 1980s. I have been proud to call this city and its ice arena a home until now. The history of the program and its sacrifice is necessary to the complete understanding of the current situation. Over 24 years ago, the Menor High School hockey program was still in its infancy. Those that committed themselves to representing our school and our city were saddled with challenges just to get to practice. They had no place to store and dry out their gear or team training equipment. They had no refuge to call home in the Menor Civic Arena, even though they were the city high school team and studied just across the street. Families had to make themselves available to transport gear daily to the high school in the middle of the day so their players could practice. The hockey community band together to request a permanent locker room devoted to our city team, the Mentor High School Cardinals. The city at that time was not willing to provide any funds to construct a structure to attach to the rink. However, they granted permission for the Menor High School hockey family to construct this structure on their own, a huge undertaking. The team, led then by Coach Jack Smeltz and assistant coach Fred Fuldauer, embraced this monumental task. The hockey family dug the footers, wheelbarrowed the gravel, and poured the concrete with no assistance from the city or city funds. Coach Smeltz, the head coach of MHS hockey at that time, would ask players in the morning to meet him at the rink to work on this room. They committed themselves to this, and in the name of the legacy they would leave to future mentor hockey players, they poured their love of hockey and of team dedication into this build. Hockey families racked their personal budgets to donate funds for supplies. They succeeded in building Mentor High School's hockey sanctuary, their home. This locker room, our Mentor High School hockey team's home, has stood for many things. This is not a permanent storage space. It's a sanctuary for the home team, a motivating goal for every Mentor youth hockey player to reach, a remembrance and a memorial to hockey brothers lost, as well as coaches. One of those amazing coaches, Fred Fuldauer, was instrumental in the construction and push to complete this facility. For those of you who may not be familiar with this amazing man, let me share his importance to our city of Mentor. Fred Fuldauer was a valued long-term resident of the city of Mentor and loved this hockey program and its skaters. He served on the Mentor Rotary for 14 years. He was a decorated officer for the Mentor Police Department from 1970 through his passing in 2004. His list of awards from the police department is long and distinguished, and he was well loved by his brothers in blue. He was the assistant coach for Mentor High School hockey, and in 2003 he even formed the JV hockey team here. This team and the space they created as their legacy meant everything to Fred. That is why it stands as a memorial to him and his sacrifices, caring, and determination for skaters past, present, and future. Ripping our locker room away is taking away a memorial to a great man who was an institution in our city police department. During such an emotional time in this city with the loss of another dedicated officer, it is time to show the utmost respect for all of our officers, past and present. By taking away our Mentor High School family's locker room, you are violating the history and legacy of every player, coach, and in this case, Mentor police officer that have personally sacrificed to enable our city's young people to feel they have a home. It is with these things in mind that I respectfully request you reconsider the city's current position and reinstate our locker room as well as the memorial items placement in the Mentor Civic Ice Arena. Thank you.
Thank you. Come on forward. Please state your name and address.
Hi, my name is Priscilla Hyclack. I'm formerly of 8188 Munson Road in Mentor. My children graduated in 2007 and 2012 from Mentor High School, both hockey players. I'm here to support the locker room initiative as well as respectfully asking where the frames went of the jerseys that we retired during my children's time at Mentor High. For those of you who may not be aware, those jerseys represent a veteran who gave his life for us and a city employee who was a fireman who passed away from cancer. Those jerseys were hung with pride, respect, and a way of saying that they were never going to be forgotten and always a member of the team. Those jerseys have been taken down. The frames are somewhere, and we are not told where. The plaques that engraved on them with their names and their dates are gone, and they're hanging at the end of the rink like a pair of jerseys out on a line to dry. If the city no longer wants to respect the fallen heroes, they could have asked the team what they wanted to do with the frames, instead of taking them down and possibly breaking them in the process. The Gunny Hall in Mentor may have been honored to take the frame for Mark, and maybe Matt's twin girls would have liked to have had their father's frame jersey as a remembrance. I'm asking for information out of respect that this is an honored thing to be part of a team. These boys show that by being here today. And the boys that are from the other alumni parks and some of our older alumni sitting in the stands here. No other city has retired jerseys and been so disrespectful. During the alumni game, our boys came in and said, "What's with the laundry?" That was their statement, not mine. We need to be respectful of these boys and what they've done and what they will do in the future. This is definitely a fraternal group. No other sport where you know each other since you were 4 or 5, and you never forget those friendships, both for the parents as well as the boys. In a time when our youth needs more direction and something to achieve and work for, the city has taken away that privilege of making the varsity team and using the locker room, which has been a part of the blood and sweat of the boys and parents of Menor High School for 24 years. On top of that, you also understand that there is talk about taking down the youth hockey banners, something of tradition. A lot of these boys that are in this room, their names are on those banners. It's an achievement. It's an achievement of the Menor residents. Would you take down any football banners? No, I don't think so. Why are we trying to erase traditions? Why are we trying to stop a sport that is so passionate for so many? I await an answer from the city and hope to hear from you soon about the frames. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wishing to speak? I know.
Hello, Council.
Your
My name
name?
is Michelle Toth.
I'm sorry, what?
My name is Michelle Toth. I live at 7495 Jasani Court in Menor. Good evening, members of Council. I grew up in Menor, graduated from Menor High School in 1992, and now my husband and I chose to raise our 4 sons here. You all know that the Menor High School locker room was built in the 90s by Coach Smeltz, Coach Faldauer, parents, and players, which was funded entirely through private donations, approved by council, and kept up through the fund of the Blue Line Club. I'm sure you have also heard that the Blue Line Club, as well as parents, are not happy with the destruction of the frames that protected the jerseys of our fallen brothers, Matthew Hank and Mark Smykowski. I am a parent of 2 now Menor High School hockey players. Our boys have all worn the Menor youth jerseys, and the people who wear a hockey jersey, especially the ones with a cardinal on it, are family. We trust our children with these family members. We eat meals together and support each other no matter when a jersey has been worn. I publicly am requesting 2 things tonight. Number 1, that the person responsible for the destruction of the memorials of our fallen Menor High School players apologize to the families. Put the jerseys back in the custom protective display cases and hang these memorials back behind the benches so they can forever be on the bench with their brothers. Number 2, Menor High School's locker room built by coaches, players, and Blue Line Club be left alone indefinitely for the use of Menor High School players. It was not built by the city, nor were any city funds used for its creation or upkeep. I have a detailed document for you all to view. I know you can't view it now, but it is online, and I will give this to you. And I can easily email anyone the document who wishes to see it electronically. What I am most upset about is the lack of willingness to work out these issues. Back when the locker room was constructed, there was communication and verbal agreements between members of the school community and the city council of that era. And I know that personally because I spoke to many of them. Fiscal responsibility was in focus, as were the children. People wanted to work together for the good of the community and not for personal gain or personal vendetta. What happened to that time? I'll tell you. Paid city employees that are not and have never been residents of the city of Menor have been employed and are whittling away at the structure of who we are as a Menor community.
Michelle, I'm going to have to stop you there. We would not allow criticizing employees.
Okay. Memorials should not be destroyed. Locker rooms taken away for those who built them. Hockey trophies of years past thrown away per staff. And CSHL and high school banners potentially be taken down because they are said to be gaudy. This is our history. This is our arena. We are proud of the accomplishments, no matter how small they may be seen as to an outsider. We pay taxes to run the arena and pay for city employee salaries. Council, you are the ones who need to comment on this. You were elected because we have faith in your ability to stand up for what is just And you have our values. As city, you have the same values and ideas as the City of Mentor residents and taxpayers. Parents have called and emailed many city council members, and we have not received consistent answers. I am asking you to please investigate this individually. I am confident that these issues will be resolved in a timely manner, as we have placed our trust in council with the city's well-being. Growing up, my father, a retired Vietnam veteran who retired from the city of Mentor, instilled in me the values of supporting our troops, police, and fire personnel and their memory. My mother instilled in me a voice to speak for those who cannot speak. I feel I am doing this right now, as are my fellow hockey family members. Thank you, members of council, for your time, and may God bless and protect our servicemen and women.
Thank you. Is there anybody else wishing to speak with anything different from what the previous presenters have?
I'm on the same lines, but I wish to voice my opinion. My name's Ernie Heller. I live at 8192 South Chariot Street. My son has played hockey in Mentor for over 12 years and is currently on the Mentor High School hockey team. The decision to take away the Mentor High School hockey locker room at the Civic Center rink is totally illogical and has no basis. The footprint of the Mentor Ice Arena has not changed in many years, so this need for space for chemicals and equipment is totally fabricated. Please remember that the Mentor High School hockey players are proud to represent the city of Mentor. They are ambassadors for this city, and on many occasions have been complimented on their exemplary behavior and goodwill as hosts, as well as participants at other arenas and tournaments. Being a hockey player at Mentor High School is a dream come true for these boys who have spent many years to reach this level of competition. The success of the team this past season is the result of many hours of hard work, practice, and commitment to the Mentor High School team. If this ice arena does not have a place for this team, then what is this facility for? Please don't choose the storage of chemicals and equipment over our Mentor High School seniors and students, other players. I imagine it will be a decision that you will live to regret for a long time. I also have other additional comments from parents involved in this program for many years that I'd like to share with you. The first one is from Frank Toth. He had 4 boys in the Mentor hockey program. From Frank, he says, I grew up in Mentor, went to Mentor Public Schools, am happy raising a family with 5 kids in Mentor, but I've never seen, heard of, or experienced anything like this. This move by the city management is embarrassing to me more than anything. It cuts directly against how I was raised. Forget about knowing Mr. Smeltz personally. He was my shop teacher in junior high and a friend after high school, even though I didn't play hockey. But I was raised where playing a sport at whatever level for the city you lived in meant everything. I just think that we are a better city, better than all others around us in this part of the country. In the end, I trust the city management folks will do the right thing. Reverse a decision that is easy to reverse anyhow. It's still called the Mentor Civic Ice Arena, last time I checked. And Mentor should stand for something, which is something you can't touch, but it's worth far more than all the tangibles associated with the counter argument. They can base their decision to reverse solely on this. If you ask me, it's that lopsided and that simple. Again, that's from Frank Toth. And then finally, I have a message from Tony Robb, who is a Blue Line Club member, parent of a current player. And he just had a couple of questions to ask. Mr. Kaminsky indicated in an email to Michelle Heller on June 19th, the administration's management goal of limiting private, personal property being intermingled with municipal operations was a reason for the hockey team's removal. What specific event led them to be concerned of this intermingling of personal property and municipal operations? The city maintains several public locations, parks, pools, where personal property is mixed with municipal operations. The other question, other organizations have permanent locker rooms inside the rink, such as the Girls Figure Skating Club. Have these organizations have been asked to vacate the rink as well? If not, why? Those were the comments that I had to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I've got a couple more.
Hello, my name is Robert Drago. Address is 9277 Bringman.
Eric Stutzman, 13574 Shirley Park Drive.
One at a time?
Yeah. He's just coming up because him and I are in that picture there, and I think we're the only ones in this room that were
right.
involved with the building of this locker room.
And I'm sorry, I didn't get the other man. What's your name?
Eric Stutzman.
Stutzman? Okay. Okay, gentlemen.
I played on the varsity team as a freshman, and I was in the picture there. I think that was the team that was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame for Mentor. We won the Barron Cup. And one of the things that, was, I guess, strong, character building was being able to have this locker room for this group of guys and knowing that this was something that, future generations were going to be able to benefit from. I've been a player through the Mentor program my whole life up until I moved to further my hockey career. And I coached at the Mentor Ice Arena for the last couple of years, donating a couple hundreds of hours to, give back to the game that I love. It's no shock for some of the people here to see me up here because I've been vocal about some of the things that have been going on in the rink over the last couple of years, and I recently pulled my children from the Mentor Youth Program and entered them into another program. That is something that I made the decision, recently because of the way that things were going. So this isn't something that I'm surprised by when it comes to taking away this locker room. I don't know exactly to the full extent of what transpired and why these things are happening. And that's another reason why I'm here. I want to try to be as civil and diplomatic as possible to try to understand that there is always another side to a story. So I think there's a lot of information out there. Could be rumors, could be truth, but I think we're all looking for some answers as to why this is being taken away from these kids. These kids are here on a night that they probably could be home playing Fortnite, and they're here listening to, all us adults talking about, what's right and what's wrong. I think we can all agree that in this situation, it's going to be emotional. I want to thank the other parents for speaking up and saying what they said, but to get back to the point where we're looking for some answers, and we're looking for not just, well, we're taking this away and that's it. We want to know if there is something else that's going to be replaced with it and what it's going to be replaced with, and is there going to be a facility for these kids. I know that, in these situations, there may not be a lot of information that you guys can give to us, but we're looking for as much information as we can. In regards to, the two people that we honored with framing their jerseys, this is tough. Matt was my goalie, he was his goalie. Fred was our coach, and I saw how the jerseys were hung up there, and I have 4 children, and I have a business, so I don't have a lot of time to kind of, dive into these debates and try to figure out what happened. I just know that it hurt real bad, and I would like to have some answers as to where those frames are and, what we can do to possibly get that back to where they belong, which is behind the bench.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, Rob pretty much covered it all, but just being that most people here probably weren't part of it, so just come to support to know that, like me and Rob were only ones in that photo that did work. Coach Smeltz was my homeroom teacher, so I didn't have much luxury to get out of the ask for help questions when he wanted help after school. But yeah, I mean, it's just sad to hear. So kind of wanted to hear it from the horse's mouth, social media. You know, there's two sides to every story. So kind of just wanted to come here and see what both sides of the story was, not
Okay.
just take one side or the other.
Thank you. Thank you. That's that.
Pardon?
Another one.
Take about 2 minutes, sir.
Okay. Your name?
Hi, my name's Drew Beavers. I live in Strongsville right now, but I'm a former resident of Mentor. Lived in 6586 Delhaven Avenue. Mentor High alumni, Mentor High hockey alumni. Worked at the ice rink. Have a lot of strong feelings, a lot of good connections here. But I think we've heard a lot about feelings tonight. I want to talk about the forward. You know, what's coming up in the future? What is the goal? What are we trying to make the Mentor ice rink? Now, I did some poking around and digging through the city council website, looking for goals, mission statements, things of that nature. Not a lot there. But Ken Kaminsky actually wrote this to the Blue Line Club parents. I just want to read this to you guys. So, the goal is to advance the Mentor Ice Arena as a premier facility in the Northeast Ohio. A very lofty goal. There's a lot of great facilities out here. Now, I understand there's some feelings elsewhere about the locker room not necessarily lining up in correspondence with some of the other teams, right? Think about Lake Catholic. They don't have a locker room there. Doesn't really seem fair. So I wanted the council to kind of consider, as we're looking at forward, you know, if we're really going to expand the facility, make it better, actually make it that premier facility, I'd like that you guys actually take into consideration actually making some standard locker rooms for each of these teams. I mean, you can't have a premier facility and not have your local teams have their own space. I don't think I've seen it anywhere, and I also grew up in Alabama. So, you know, south of Mason-Dixon line, even teams have their own locker rooms down there. So if you want to be premier, think about the kids, give them something inspired to foster kind of that fondness, that family. So I just ask that, you know, as you move forward, I know that's not going to be today, it's not going to be next year, but 5-10 years down the road when we're sitting there looking at it saying, okay, hey, let's add another section to the rink. Let's make it a little bit better. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Please take that in consideration. Build in these locker rooms, build in the space for these teams and these programs that actually could use it, deserve it. And that's all I have.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
I just want to make a quick comment.
Yeah.
I'm actually the union.
Got to come up to the podium, sorry.
I didn't want to be real formal, but I will.
Your name, sir?
Evening. My name's Jason Christo, 7258 Allendale. And I am actually the president of the Lake Catholic Hockey Booster Club. I appreciate you mentioning Lake Catholic. Regardless of whether or not there's a locker room in Lake Catholic's future or not, I wanted to be here and just to support the group. My son played with all these boys. He's going to be a senior at Lake. I think Mentor should have their own locker room.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
You didn't, sir.
No, you didn't fill it out. Was there somebody in here who was speaking on something else? Because these people.
Hi, my name's Bill Parrish. I live at 6252 Foxwood Court. I just had a question in regards to if I were a city employee or a city vendor or supplier, and there's something going on that was immoral or illegal, or some other impropriety, is there any system in place that they can call like an outside third party to report it?
You call anybody on council.
Outside third party?
I'm sorry, what?
Outside third party.
I'm
They
not
weren't
sure.
comfortable with talking to council, or if they were an employee, their supervisor or their manager or council.
In other words, you don't want to talk to anybody in the city. You want
Saying
an
if I wor-
outside, yeah. No,
If I
we don't.
worked for the city and I was concerned about a situation and I was worried about the repercussions if I reported it to my supervisor
Oh,
or my
okay.
manager
Well, I'll have
or
to
to
have,
council.
have to let the city answer that. I mean, I know most businesses a lot of times have that for what we call employee practices and stuff like that, but
Yeah, the company I work for has it.
Yeah, sir, I don't recall your name, but if,
It's Bill Parrish.
Mr. Parrish, so if you had a concern that was, of significance with any city employee, you could certainly call me on any given
no,
day.
he's, Mr. Flipiak, he's asking if you're a city employee.
Or a
and you see an
vendor or a
abuse or
supplier.
something like that, and that employee feels like he'd be, chastised or,
Well,
for-
the first point of contact would always be the director of that department. If that was someone you didn't feel you had confidence in, you could contact myself, you could contact the assistant city manager. I mean,
but we have no outside party where they could contact.
well, I'm
I
not
don't know
sure
how
what
we
the
would
nature
have
of
that,
your concern is, but I mean, if it's criminal, you could call the police department,
Yeah,
you know.
They work for the city, right?
What's that?
They work for the
The
city.
Attorney General.
Of course they do.
Thank you.
Okay, sure. Okay. Okay, let's try and move on here.
Wait a minute, I think one of the boys wanted to stand up and say something, and I think we should hear from the players.
Did you fill out a form here? I mean,
Yes.
we've got a system to, and which,
I'm sure he probably did, sir.
okay, can I have the name?
Jacob Gable.
What is it?
Jacob Gable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh? Okay. It's all right, we got it anyhow. Okay, Jake, you go ahead.
All right, so this is a letter written by my uncle, and he helped build the locker room. Over 20 years ago, the players and coaches at Menor High School headed over to the ice arena daily and dug footers, hauled cinder blocks, and built the locker room that until the other day was an aspirational place for every youngster playing for the Menor youth hockey program. I was on the team that built that place. It started as just a place to store our hockey gear, but became so much more for an entire generation of players. My most vivid memory of building that place was when it was completed and I was asked by my assistant coach, Fred Foldauer, to help him move a refrigerator into the place. Fred was a mentor institution. He was a U.S. Navy veteran, a secretary for the Menor Rotary for 14 years, and served on the Menor Police Department from 1970 until his passing in 2004. He won many awards for his service to Menor, including being awarded Menor Police Department Officer of the Year in 1991 by his peers. More importantly, he was a coach and a mentor to countless young men since he began coaching hockey in 1982, eventually landing in the assistant coach role of the Menor High School team. The team meant a lot to Fred, so much that the team that built the locker room was mentioned specifically in Fred's obituary. To take this locker room for the organization that Fred Foldauer loved so much is a slap in the face and an insult. This week, as you are paying your respects to one fallen officer's family, you are disrespecting another officer's memory by a callous act that can be avoided. Have you asked the families of Menor hockey if they would like to preserve this locker room and perhaps aid you in the building of another room to store chemicals? We have expected a lot of these fine young players over the years, and the program has grown due to not only their dedication, but the dedication of the families and the coaches, including Fred Foldauer. I urge you to do the right thing and let the Menor High School team keep this locker room that they built with their own hands and explore other options for your needs. Respectfully, Chad Lyman, MHS hockey player from 1992 to 1995. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think they should.
Mr. Flipiak.
Well, there's,
Oh. Okay. Name?
Michelle Heller, 8192 South Terriot Street. I'm a hockey mom. My son has played hockey through the Menor youth hockey program since the age of 4. It was the coaches in that program that cultivated him to the player he is today. In some ways, you can say that if it wasn't for the Menor Arena, and if it wasn't for the Menor Youth Hockey Program and the clinics that they afforded my son wouldn't be the hockey player that he is today. We have had a very good experience in Mentor with hockey. I'm a very proud parent of my hockey son and of all these boys in this room. I care about every single one of them. And I am here tonight to represent them, hopefully in a clear and concise way. If I can communicate anything to you, please realize we are talking about kids here. And what you're doing is you're taking away a sanctuary from a group of kids, boys and girls, that call that place their home. There's history there. They know it. They've built it. This group is a brotherhood. Ironically, one of the members on your council, Mr. Marn, has been part of our hockey family. Now, he may not have the same type of positive experience that we have, and this is publicly known. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but because we haven't had, in my opinion, good answers.
Who hasn't had a positive experience?
Let me.
Don't say that.
Wait, Mr. Marn,
I
and
myself have not had a positive
yeah,
experience.
okay, we can't get personal.
Right, it has
I'm
nothing
not
to
being
do with
personal.
me.
What I'm doing is I'm saying
It's whether my
there's-
son has had a positive experience, and yes, he has had a positive experience. In fact, it's so positive, him playing hockey since he was 3, and played with Bill Benedictus and everybody else all the way up. He's playing next year at Augustana College, a Division III school that plays Division II ACHA in Illinois.
Good.
So thank you.
Good. I really don't want to get into any kind of debate personally with Mr.
And we don't want
Martin.
you to either.
No, so I'm going to stay off of that. But the point that I want to make is this. To date, Mr. Kaminsky, yes. We have had correspondence. The correspondence that we have been sharing and that has been given, it's circular.
Yeah.
It's circular in its explanation. Our facility, our arena, it's a beautiful arena, especially lately, and we're proud to call it our home. There are plenty of places we feel in that arena where chemicals can be stored. There was a new chiller that was installed a couple years ago. There's already supplies. The compressor for that is already contained in another room. We just don't feel that the use of our locker room is going to really meet the needs for cleaning supplies, etc.
Okay, you're at your time limit.
The second point I want to make is that as far as the personal equipment goes here, the city's talking about granting us storage bins, and those storage bins are going to take up the same amount of space.
Ma'am, it's the end of your time.
Okay, I just want to conclude by saying.
I thought we were going to have a couple representatives, but now we haven't. It seems like everybody wants to talk, so we have to keep it down to 4 minutes.
I understand.
And you're past your 4 minutes, so.
There's a lot of different facets to this argument.
I understand that. I understand
I'd
it.
like to ask council to please consider and make sure that there's not an illegitimate use of power going on here and taking the kids' locker room
Thank you.
away at the beginning of this season. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jeff Massey, 7092 Cornell Lane. Honestly, I was going to sort of respect your request to kind of keep it to a few people who are speaking, but I just was reading the nonverbals of the council, and I just felt like, no, we should probably continue to voice our opinions here. So, obviously, hockey parent, also the parent and big fan of high school sports. My daughter played on the 2013 softball team that went to the Final Four, and what I saw there was, you know, those kids coming together from really a lot of different sort of backgrounds and doing something great and learning that when you walk on a team, work as a team, it doesn't matter what your socioeconomic backgrounds, political beliefs are, and that's what high school sports teaches kids. I'm sure most of you can recognize. And you know, when I understand you have to be prudent with taxpayer dollars if this is really a space issue. You know, where I work, we have those same constraints all the time. You know, there's a lot of extra space in that facility. There's a lot of misuse or wasted space that can be repurposed to store whatever chemicals. And you know, you have the right to take that space, but it's not right to take a space that wasn't built by you, funded by you, and it was funded by the hockey parents and the people that dedicated their times to make that a viable space for these kids to really become a team and become those future leaders. So, you know, you can manifest destiny this thing all day long, but it isn't the right thing to do. The right thing to do is to find the proper location to store the things you need to store there and give these kids a place they can become a bond and a bond as a team.
Thank you.
I'm Ted Zalewski. My address is 7422 Parker Drive, Menor. And I just felt I should say something also. The locker room is really important for these kids. I've raised my son in Menor to be proud of Menor and to be proud of the school and the city. I mean, it sounds corny, but in our house, I send him out the door, and I always tell him, be the best Cardinal you can be. And the reason I'm up here, and I'm not saying anything bad, Mr. Martin called me yesterday morning.
No, you got to.
I'm just stating what he did. And he told me how embarrassed and unhappy his child was in the Menor hockey system. How the coach embarrassed his child. Yes.
We can't go there.
I'm telling you what he told me.
I'm saying we're not in front of council. You two want to discuss this after council, that's fine.
It does have something to do with it.
Pardon?
It has something to do with this issue.
Not with this,
Yes, this issue of the
your
hockey.
conversation between Mr. Myron and yourself is the conversation between you. That's not what this people before council
Okay,
is
I
about.
just want it to be known.
That's fine, sir.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Krieger?
No,
Mr. President,
no, not at this time.
Just to give a little bit of history on the hockey.
Well, first, I'd like to move on and give the administration.
My remarks will be brief. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Andy Rigo, and I've been a lifelong citizen, a resident of Menor, Ohio. Back in 1982, after the Civic Arena was opened, I played on one of the inaugural teams.
That's not.
While I only played one season, I learned a lot about what it takes to become a better player. I learned discipline, teamwork, and if you want something, you have to work hard to get it. As a dad, I now get to see my son Will learn these same important life lessons as a mentor of the Menor Youth Hockey Pee Wee team. Last year, as we watched that team work together to sharpen their skills. That hard work and determination paid off when they won the CSHL championship for their division against a very tough opponent. The look of pride on those kids' faces was priceless. And in turn, as they posed with their trophy, we parents were proud of them achieving their goal, which they earned in relentless energy, pain, and lots of sweat. Last year, the Menor High School team worked very hard, and they too were rewarded for it. 24 years ago, a group of parents and players worked very hard and gave their time, talent, and treasure to build a locker room. By taking this space from the team, we set a terrible example that says no matter how hard you work for something, someone more powerful than you can simply strip it away on a whim. I asked the city to please reconsider their decision and return this locker room to the Menor High School Hockey Band of Brothers, both current and past. Thank you.
Okay. At this time, I think we had enough people talk before council. Would the administration like to make any comments?
Mr. President, I already asked, real quick. Back about 10 years ago, when we were going through the Great Recession, John Conrad was then city manager, and we're looking for ways to cut money. At that time, the rink was losing $450,000 a year. That was the number one thing they wanted to cut, shut it down. I explained to the administration at that point in time what hockey meant, what figure skating meant, what a great asset that is to the community. I want to personally thank, and Ray Kirshner was the only one that was on council, but he was the first one to have my back in that decision and fight. And if anybody watched a council meeting at that time when we're going through the budget discussions, and we made them public as much as can be, because we're making cuts everywhere, because we were under $3 million unencumbered, and our goal is to get back to $10 million. If you have someone that's losing almost $500,000 at the first place. Ray was the first one to have my back in order to fight with that thing in order to keep that arenas open. So I want to thank Mr. Kircher. I want to thank council at that time for keeping that open and making it what it is today. Because if everyone remembers that was around that time, it was run down. Everything needed to be fixed. From the boards to the lighting was horrible. We've put a lot of money in that. We got grants. We worked very hard. We hired an excellent person to run that rink where now you see advertising. You have national hockey tournaments coming in. And that arena, just to let you know, still loses about $300,000 taxpayer dollars. But it's that important to the community. And even if we would fill that arena 24/7, 365 days a year, it would still lose money. Because we can't charge enough. Anything you freeze and you heat at the same time, you can't do it. So I truly believe that arena is an asset. It's great for families, and it was a great time for my kid to grow up and be the person he is today, to go to college next year and play college hockey.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kircher.
Mr. Flipiak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm glad we have an opportunity to maybe clear up a few bits of misinformation first. And first of all, as it relates to, let's talk a little bit about the memorial jerseys to Matt Hank and Mark Smikowski. Those jerseys were hung from the rafters as a way, and of course, clearly opinions can differ on these things, but the intention there was to give them greater honor in an elevated place of honor within that facility because of what they mean not only to the hockey community, but quite frankly to the greater Mentor community at large. I will remind everybody that made comments on that the city hosts every single year a memorial tournament to Matt Hank along with the Mentor Fire Department, and where significant resources are contributed to that every single year so that we can keep his memory alive. And I can promise you that the Mentor Fire Department and most of the city workers that had the benefit of working with him lament his loss equally as much, if not more. With respect to Sergeant Smikowski, obviously this council has dedicated a piece of highway within this community to his memory as an enduring memorial, and certainly we have respect for him. I'm not sure where the comments came from that these things were ripped out of their cases and they were beat up and thrown away, but they're sitting right behind Mr. Schweikert in complete form, and those who are associated with that are more than willing to take them with them tonight if they would like to. I'll also ask Mr. Zampedro to read the release of information that was done on Veterans Day when those jerseys were placed in the rafters. This came from Bill Furman, who is the manager of that facility.
Today, we salute all of our country's veterans who battled and sacrificed for us with the highest possible price at risk. Specifically, we honor the memory of Mark Smikowski, a former Mentor High hockey player and U.S. Marine, who paid that very price, Iraq 2006. Mr. Smikowski, we are indebted to you. We salute you and will forever hold you and your family close in our hearts. Thank you, and thank you to all of our veterans. That was posted, I believe, on their Facebook page and liked by pages of people.
So, there may be some disagreement in this room about how to best memorialize some of our best and brightest of the past, but we certainly honor them nonetheless, and with equal sentiment. Also, I'm not certain where where the rumor was that we were about to be removing wholesale banners and throwing them out. That isn't happening. Practical terms, there will come a day where we can only hang so much on the walls in that facility, but right now there's no interest in removing banners. In fact, I think if you look at the facility today, you'll notice that there is actually a lot more items on the walls that pay tribute not only to our past champions, but our present participants at that arena. Just a couple of comments as to why the decision was made, and I think we all certainly appreciate the sentimental attachment and the history and the memories that go with participation, but I think it's important to remind everybody in here that the city plays host to these events. We are host to the Mentor School District for many of our activities, and the Mentor School District hosts many of our activities. The decision to remove personal property on city terms has been going on for several years now, and council's very aware of other examples of this. You know, we removed, there were a number of third parties that were operating at the marina performing service work out there. None of that happens anymore, because again, these are risk management and liability issues that we don't want happening on public property. We have removed 5 caretaker properties from 5 city parks in the recent years. I mean, these were residents who maintained all of their belongings on the city's property. And then again, there's certain activities that happen within facilities that are not controlled by us, and and actions within those that we can't control that create certain levels of risk for the city. We have recently removed the credit union that operated in this very building just, you know, six months, not even 6 months ago. Again, private activities happening in a public facility. Certainly appreciate, you know, everyone who spoke here today. Of course there is a space need out there. You've all been there. The amphitheater that operates out here actually has compromised that space need to some extent, because we really didn't plan for enough storage for that facility, and a lot of that gets headed that way. But the intention of that space will be to use it for materials that are hazardous materials as defined by OSHA. I mean, the refrigerant that we use is different. It needs to be placed in a secure place. It's compressed. It's a compressed chlorofluoromethane, and needs to be in a secure and ventilated space, and that space will be ventilated for that purpose. You know, this is really the only non-city program that we're aware of that makes a special accommodation for special storage. You know, every other user at that facility, from Lake High School, someone here's from Lake High School, Notre Dame, all of these people who have, you know, they have Mentor residents on those teams. They don't enjoy that permanent storage area. They carry their personal equipment to and from the facility. We have, you know, Mentor High School as well as other schools participate at our golf course. They bring their equipment there. Their baseball and softball teams, the swim teams, all of these groups use our facilities and are not guaranteed permanent storage there. We have made an accommodation which we believe is workable. You know, we can't certainly attach sentimentality to that, but there are 20 temporary lockers, 20 permanent locker spaces will actually create greater space than the individual space that was within that the high school storage area. You know, there's 20 of them there. I think we noted that there's 25 locker stalls in the current Mentor hockey room. So, you know, we have to add a few more of those, and those are intended to be used by all teams on practice days, on game days. Bring your things, you store it there. If you have to go to school that day, you remove it at the end of the day and take it home. So we've tried to make that accommodation. You know, this is not this is not the first, and it certainly won't be the last. And while, you know, the efforts of that group, you know, back in the early 90s to build that facility were appreciated, there's certainly been a lot of utility gotten out of that, but we have other community groups that routinely invest in the city property without taking ownership of that. All of you are aware of the fact that our ball fields are routinely upgraded with fencing and all sorts of things, dugouts and all these things that get donated. And I'll remind them too that school facilities are routinely cost offset by donations. You're donating to a memorial gym. You don't expect that those that donate are going to be the ultimate caretakers and only users of that space. So, you know, while we certainly appreciate everyone's concern here, we believe that accommodations have been made, and you know, if they're not adequate, we'll work on that. But the space has been provided, and quite frankly, I think it bothers me a little bit to know that the commitment of the city to this hockey program is being called into question. So just as some reminders, over the 30 years that we've conducted high school hockey out there, the city has, if you look at today's dollar terms, the city would have offset the cost of ice time, practice time, game time by the tune of about $500,000 in today's terms. Over that same time, and I think Mr. Marn pointed this out very effectively, I'm just giving you the last 3 years. In 2015, the city had a net operating loss of over $450,000. 2016, that loss, because it included some improvements to the facility, was $730,000 plus. Last year, Mr. Kaminsky, with some good management out there, got that down to just over $280,000. So historically, if you look back in that 10 to 15-year window, it's about $400,000 a year that is lost by keeping that facility open. And of course, that doesn't count for a lot of the improvements or the original purchase of that property. So, it's certainly fair to say that without the city's willingness to sustain that loss, there wouldn't be any programs out there, or the high school programs or any other. We continue to invest in the arena. Everybody in here is aware of some of the improvements we've done. They're not inexpensive. The city takes no gate from the high school games that are played out there. In 30 years, you're probably averaging no less than $5,000 a season in revenues that come through that. The city takes none of that, never has. So I think our commitment is fairly strong out there. With council's willingness, it will remain. But sometimes, in the end of the day, it is still our responsibility to manage city facilities for the benefit of all users out there. The mention was made about the figure skating. That scenario is a little bit different, that's being addressed in a similar fashion. So it's not as has been suggested incorrectly, it's not a vendetta against anyone or any person. We have spoken to the Mentor School District, had a meeting last week with the superintendent and the athletic director. They understand the decision. They make similar decisions. Council is fully aware that we've had a difficult time. Changes in policy at the Mentor School District have eliminated entire programs for the city. People who can no longer at all participate in those programs. So this is not an indictment on them, because we're appreciative of all the cooperation we do get, but things can change over time, this is our commitment to the Mentor Youth Program is strong. That program is stronger than ever. We believe that's going to serve as a great feeder system to all of the high school programs and residents who participate in high school programs in the city. These are not haphazard decisions.
Thank you. I'm sorry, ma'am, the people before council is over. We can't let you
I
talk.
spoke with you on the phone, and you made a promise to me over the phone. Linda Lyman, 8449 Markwood Drive, Mineral Ohio.
Yes, I know who you are.
Okay, all right.
But you should have, you were supposed,
There would be a person here that would explain why, out of all the room in the arena, there's the one question, you promised me that locker room is the only place that could be used for somewhat hazardous material from OSHA says has to be protected. Now that was your correct? Didn't you tell me? That person would be here that would answer that question.
what I promised you, and
for
what
all of
I
us.
think that the
And
administration has answered, that room is what they need for these chemicals, because it's got to be a secure area. You can't store it behind the grandstand, for example.
No.
They said this is going to,
There are other
secure
locker
area,
rooms.
secure
There are other
area that will be
locker rooms.
ventilated.
There are other locker rooms.
I'm not going to argue with you, ma'am.
All right, you've answered the question in saying that you do not have anybody here that can answer the specific question why only that space
Ms. Lyman,
could be
you should have
used.
come up during
You answered the question. You did not stick to your word.
Move to adjourn.
Thank you. Mr. President, can I
Yes.
make a statement,
Yes,
please?
Ms. Dowling.
This is a little bit off topic, but there was a gentleman, and I apologize, I don't remember his name, but there were comments made about how someone goes about reporting misbehavior or something about a city employee or anyone
Right.
on the staff or anything like that. And I have got to say that in my years of council, everybody knows I'm the Facebook lady, and I'm on Facebook, and residents regularly contact me about all types of things. And I will share that I have had city employees, spouses, contact me, make statements, make allegations. I have always been free to go to Mr. Filipiak. Mr. Filipiak has honored the fact that I have requested it be kept anonymous. He has never pushed to know the name of that employee, and he has always gotten me the answers and a satisfactory answer to the situation. So I take a little bit of offense that there is nothing in process here, and I can attest that Mr. Filipiak he's never tried to find out who the employee is so there can be any kind of retaliation or anything like that. And I just needed to make that clear tonight.
Thank you, thank you. We have a motion to adjourn?